So a lot of times folks come into this studio and we do interviews, but there are a few occasions which I truly enjoy when it's just talking with a friend. And this is one of those occasions. Valerie Bauerlein, welcome back to the FITSNews studio. It's been a little while.
Almost a year.
Yep. Last time you were here, you were promoting this book, and I just have to say this because this is absolutely amazing. This book, Devil at His Elbow, now a New York Times best seller. I got to ask you, how does that feel? That is just amazing.
No, it's really wild, and thank you. You've been so generous about the book, but I think I've done 82 events
Oh my gosh.
between podcasts and talks. I was at the Harvard Club in New York last week. People up there had questions about it. I was in Goldsboro a couple weeks ago. We had Goldsboro, North Carolina, where I
Mhm.
live. We had like 275 people at a community college to hear the story. I think there is something about the story that was so captivating to people, but it's been very rewarding to me that 2 years after the verdict, there's still interest in what it means, which is what I tried to explain with the book.
No, absolutely. And this is the definitive take on this saga right now. But I have to throw in for now because I know you've been following the news over the last few weeks. There have been developments related to not only Alec Murdaugh's appeal, but Becky Hill, the clerk of court,
So
who,
many developments.
right, her arrest very recently. I want to ask you, and I've spoken with a bunch of folks about this in the last few weeks, but your perspective, I really want to get. Where are you on Alec Murdaugh's chances for a new trial? Do you think this is a done deal at this point? Do you think it's still an uphill climb? Do you think the guy gets a new trial, and why or why not?
Well, I listened to your interview with Dick Harpootlian recently, and he was very bullish on the odds. But spoiler: Dick is very bullish on what he thinks is going to happen, as long as it favors what he wants to happen. But no, I tend to agree that the odds of a new trial on the homicides is so much higher
Mm.
than a year ago, or even in the wake of the evidentiary hearing in January 2024, when Becky Hill was on the stand and talking about the jury tampering allegations. So I think part of that is just we know a lot more than we knew then about Becky's Becky's credibility, unfortunately, and then we also I say unfortunately because she was a person that I came to really
Both of
like,
us,
and
all of us.
everybody. I remember I think it was Dick Harpootlian who stood up and said, point of personal privilege, I just want to praise Becky, who's the best clerk of court in the state.
Mhm.
And Creighton's popped up that day, and I want to praise Becky. And
Oh,
you
the
know,
AG called her Becky Boo.
she was the principal of the little elementary school that we were living in for 6 weeks, and she ran a good courtroom, and we relied on her. The jury relied on her. So that's why I say, unfortunately, we found out things about her credibility when these warrants came out a couple weeks ago. I think that, but then also the change in the Supreme Court.
Hmm.
That is a significant change in terms of potential um, favorability to Alec Murdaugh's argument that he deserves a new trial. I think also the retirement of Judge Newman, who was so well liked and such a lion of the judicial community in the state. So I don't know, but I think on the state level, I'm not sure. On the federal level, his chances of getting new trial on the homicide are fairly high in my view.
And that's based on just the interpretation of those federal statutes for tampering.
For tampering, I mean, because we had such a like, not like, but we had a similar case involving Russell Laffitte, the banker who was convicted on very significant federal charges, and
Hmm.
his conviction was overturned because of problematic interactions between the judge and the jury, according to the Fourth Circuit Court of Appeals. I think that caught me by surprise, I guess I should say,
Sure.
and that the standards that they applied make it more likely that Alec might get a new trial. We're several years from it, I
We
believe.
are.
But I always like to say in the epilogue of the book, that's that hearing in Beaufort in November of 2023. So 7, 8 months after his conviction on the double homicides, we were all in Beaufort, and you remember it was such a different vibe. I write about it, like I said in the epilogue. Alec comes in an orange jumpsuit. He's shackled hand and feet. He looks around the courtroom. Buster's not there. John Marvin's not there. His sister's not there. He's very much alone. And the bailiffs are not making eye contact with him. And he proceeded to plead guilty to all the predicate crimes, right? The motive. So, what that did was ensure that he will be in prison, in state prison, for the rest of his natural life. So we do have a first ending, regardless of how many different iterations of the Alec Murdaugh story we see in the coming years. We do have a first ending, and he will never be free of state custody, in my view.
Yeah, and nor should he. I mean, I think all the folks that sort of conflate this as, well, you want a new trial, you must think Alec Murdaugh is not guilty. No, no, no. That's certainly not where I'm coming from. I think he deserves a new trial because his Sixth Amendment rights were violated. I
Well, I
still
think
think
you're,
he's,
I
you
think
know,
you were pretty clear about that. You and Jen Wood both, on your views about that, whether his rights to a fair trial were violated. But you remember, I mean, that jury, 6 or 8 of them knew each other by first
they
name before they
did.
walked to the bag.
They did
And Becky knew a lot of them
very closely.
very closely. And so, um, yeah, I don't know where we end up, but it's more likely today than it was a year ago, for sure.
Let's talk a little bit about the fallout from this because the Becky Hill arrest, her indictment on these charges, obstruction of justice, clearly nothing related to the jury tampering. Actually, let me ask you that before we get to the fallout. If you're prosecutors for the state of South Carolina, how do you credibly argue that Becky Hill is telling the truth when she said she didn't tamper with the jury, but oh, by the way, we're seeking a perjury charge against her over here?
I mean, it's a tough one for the state, right? I mean, it is important that her credibility is intact when they say the jury, it was a fair trial. Nobody tampered with the jury. But they also, there were a significant, how many ethics charges were there? And ethics questions raised by the Ethics Commission, like 70 plus. So there were some significant questions about her behavior. So they were under, pressure to take it very seriously. And if they found evidence of it, it's a very hard baby to split for the
Yeah,
state. And I think somewhat the same for Curtis Eddie Smith,
yeah.
right?
Another one of the loose ends here
He's
is
out on, I mean, how long has he been out on bail?
several years.
Several years, but charged with some pretty serious crimes. I mean, that first roadside shooting, drug trafficking, right? I mean, it's a pretty serious felonies.
And at one point, Alec Murdaugh's attorney suggested he may have had something to do with the double
Oh,
homicide.
not just at one point. I mean, they put it in writing,
Yeah,
right? And that big bombshell filing, I want to say it was in November of
2022.
22, right before the trial. They said the reason that the state's, the reason that the state's not looking for the real killer, because the real killer is Curtis Eddie Smith, who was their key witness potentially. And as we know, in the end, neither side called him. But if there's a new trial,
All bets are off.
all bets are off, particularly if the financials do not come in, right?
Does Alec Murdaugh testify in the new trial, if there is one?
I don't know. I mean, his lawyers didn't want him to testify in the first one. They were calling every reputable defense lawyer in the state and saying, Alex shouldn't testify, right? And they would say, no, tell him that so-and-so said so, up till the night before he testified. But what we know about Alec is that the lure of a microphone and the world at his feet, he knew. I can remember watching him sit at the defense table with that pen in his hand during one of the breaks, and like Creighton was talking to Dick Harpootlian, and the jury was leaving, and all of us were kind of milling around. And Alec just sat there chewing his pen, looking at like the chaos, the maelstrom that he had set off in that room.
He
And
thought he could master it.
it was a smirk, right? He was the center, he was the eye of the storm. And I think he relishes that role.
And he thought he could control the direction too. He
Oh,
really thought he could pull it
he
off.
can convince, I mean, his skill. I mean, Jim Moss, one of his mentors, who's also no longer practicing law, Corey Fleming's former law partner. Jim told me, he's like, we can say bullshit, right?
Absolutely.
He's like, Alec was no great student of the law, but he was a great bullshitter. And then sometimes that's all you need. And Alec convinced people of things all the time. And I think it would be hard for him to resist the
Well,
urge to do it.
To me, it was telling when Jim Griffin stood up in the first trial and said, the defendant wishes to testify. He's like, we're not calling
I
him.
love the fact you're calling it the first trial.
We're
when
not
we don't
calling
know if
him.
we're going to have a second
Well,
trial yet.
fair enough. But
No, he said, I'll never forget it. He said the defendant, Richard Alexander Murdaugh, would like to take the stand or like to testify. And I wrote in my notes, is this really happening?
Mhm.
because we were all just gobsmacked that he would. But in the end, I came to think, well, why was I surprised?
Yeah.
In the room where he was raised, where his grandfather's on the back wall, right?
Mhm.
Where his great grandfather, in that room, his great grandfather, Randolph Murdaugh Sr., who started the whole line, he was known as Mr. Fire and Brimstone because it was the days before amplification. And he
Yeah.
just had this magical voice. So why was I surprised that Alec would want to talk to my people? My people need to hear from me,
Mhm.
you know?
So the fallout from this past month's news, obviously it has revived interest in this case. I'm sure it's been good for the book. But I want to ask you this. There were a lot of folks putting up this picture, and we're going to put it up here. Dylan's going to put it up. This was toward the end of the trial. It was a birthday party for Becky Hill, who, again, at the time, everyone's just assuming, like you said, the school principal, no indication that there was anything untoward going on with her or perhaps her involvement with the trial. But this is now being kind of weaponized, I guess, if maybe that's the best term. And some of the folks in this picture, you included, me included, even Dylan running this show right now, singled out. What do you make when you see the criticism like this coming at
Well,
members of the
and I should say it's public knowledge. It was my birthday. It was my birthday that day, and that's at the Airbnb where I was staying in Walterboro. With the day we found out when the trial had been set, I went and I was like, okay, I know I'm
It's a
writing this
beautiful
book.
place.
It was I know I need to be there. We thought we were going to be there 2 weeks, right? I rented it for
Mhm.
like 3 weeks in an abundance of caution, and then I kept having to re-rent it. But there was really no gathering place in downtown Walterboro with the hours that we were all working. Y'all were working till double
We didn't
late,
sleep.
late double digits,
There was
never
no
slept.
sleeping.
And then, so we really didn't have time to gather as a group. And it was we were towards the last week of the trial.
Mhm.
It was my birthday, and Becky, her birthday was also coming up. So I sent an email to all the press corps, and it's been FOIA'd. It's out in the public knowledge. I'm kind of embarrassed because every time I love cake. Like, cake is I mean, I'm like the guy in, Jumanji,
Mhm.
Kevin Hart in Jumanji, where his weakness is cake, and anytime anyway,
That's my kryptonite. I mean,
I love that movie.
who hates cake?
I love cake, and so every time I say, "Please, and please join us for this kind of wrap up, get together for pizza and all caps cake." I say it
Hmm.
multiple times. So, and I own that. All the media was invited. All the lawyers on both sides were invited. Several people came. The staff was invited. Please invite anybody I'm missing. It was an open
Yeah.
event for us to be together casually. But what I'll say about it is one of the things about that trial that was nice. There's been so much change in the news industry.
Mm.
And when I started out, you would be in a newsroom with 50 or 100 people on a daily basis. You'd go cover something with peers and hang out, and then maybe go to, hunter gatherer after session when I covered the legislature, and talk with people more casually, Democrats,
Yeah.
Republicans, staffers. So one of the things I really loved about that time in Walterboro, as hard as it was, we were a press corps. Like, corps, we all were coming from different perspectives. We're telling different stories. You would get a good break, and I'd be like, "Dang, I wish I knew. I wish, yeah, I wish I had that." And there were three other people writing a book, and we sat
Yeah.
together, right?
Yeah.
We still text. We have a text thread. Part of what in it, I think it's healthy to compete. It's healthy to have as many perspectives as possible, but it's also incredibly healthy to be cordial and to remember, you know, our shared, the,
Yeah.
we're also humans. So, yeah, it stings a little bit, you know, but I own that party. I'm glad we did it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Absolutely. One of the things I learned during that trial, which I think leading into it, I didn't have as good a conception of, was what you said about a core, about how people work together. And so one of the things, in fact, we were down at a court event earlier this week on something unrelated in Richland County, South Carolina. I was telling one of my younger reporters, hey, if ever you have an opportunity on something that's already out there, if it's a release that's been sent, tap the guy next to you, tap the girl to the other side, say, hey, make sure you got this.
Hmm.
Share information where and when you can. And so one of the things I loved about that trial was that it felt from the beginning like everybody there covering it they were competing certainly, but where they could, they were legitimately trying to help everybody else covered it.
And I think there was, this is Walterboro is a small town with 5,500 people. This was we haven't had this kind of case in this country in 20 years.
Yeah.
And so you had a system where there were literally 800 exhibits roughly.
Yeah.
And we were trying to it took 2 weeks before we even had a monitor where we could see the exhibits. They could, the lawyers could see them, the jury could see them, but the press couldn't see them, right? And so
Yeah.
we were trying to sort that out in real time and work together and kind of and lobby for access that our readers and subscribers needed. So yeah, I think it was meaningful to me. You remember when we had the jury visit to Moselle, which was
Mhm.
just
And you were the reporter chosen to represent the whole pool.
it was a huge honor. But one of the things I did is I think I called you, I called Avery Wilkes, I called John Monk, I called, Thad Moore at the Post and Courier, everybody I knew, Gigi, everybody I knew, and said, what do we want to know?
Mhm.
This is the press pool, which
Mhm.
means it goes to everybody, and I'm your representative. So yeah, I think enjoy is the wrong word, right? But it
Yeah,
was a reminder of what's good about this field to me.
indeed. I felt the same way, and I didn't expect that coming into it because it was such a competitive story. But for those 6 weeks, it really felt like it was a team covering it. And I attribute that to a certain group not being there. I'll go ahead and say that. A couple of my former employees who were not present, at least during the majority of the trial. But I wanted to point out some of the criticism on there was from one of my former employees, Mandy Matney, was pretty harsh. She's been very vocally critical of you. When you see stuff like this, kind of these allegations, what does that make you think?
I know Mandy or knew Mandy. She and I have very different memories of our the time that we spent,
Yeah.
and I'll leave it at that. I
All
mean,
right.
I hope that my work stands for itself. I've worked really hard for a long time to build a reputation, and I just feel like for the Wall Street Journal, where I work and am proud to work, and then for me personally, just engaging in any sort of Twitter beef or something. I mean, I just it's not what I'm about. It's not what I
Yeah.
want to do.
Well, let's talk about another case that you're very focused on here in South Carolina. In fact, the reason you're in South Carolina right now is this case out of Horry County,
Horry
South Carolina.
County. Yeah.
The Scott Spivey shooting. This happened back in the fall of 2023. It was an aggressive pursuit, truck pursuit, not law enforcement. These are private
Hmm.
citizens here. But Spivey, an insurance adjuster from North Carolina, is that correct? Have I got
Hmm.
that right?
Yeah.
And then a restaurant owner, Weldon Boyd, chasing him in this truck with one of his friends. It ends in a hail of gunfire, a botched police investigation. You wrote the definitive story on this, Val, a two-part series, front page of the Wall Street Journal. Give us this uh, tale. What's alluring about this story? What's drawn you to this story?
Well, I thought I had a pretty good handle on the capacity for corruption and I guess I'll just say it, official misdeeds, given what is in the devil at his elbow. Given I'm thinking in particular about the DNR investigation of Mallory Beach, and I think it's chapter 13. There is a lengthy chapter in my book where I try to document 11 or 12 missing pieces of evidence that just went away. I mean, how can you? There are pictures of you taking DNA swabs. How did they disappear? You say in the here that you recorded this interview. Where's the recording? I thought I had understood that corruption, even with as much checks and balances that we're supposed to have. I thought I understood that it existed. That what we're seeing in Scott Spivey case is on another level, on an institutional level, in my view,
Wow.
happening in the police department.
Walk us through some of the
Well, so
allegations.
so I think one of the things to understand is that part of South Carolina, that Horry County line, it has moved. Like Camp Swamp Road, where Scott Spivey was killed, has been in South Carolina at times. It's been in North Carolina at times. It's a very porous area. There's Tabor City, which is North Carolina, and then Loris are called the Twin Cities. So you
Mhm.
live in Tabor City, but you shop at the Food Lion in downtown Loris, or you live
It's
in
only like
Loris.
3 or 4 miles,
Oh,
right?
yes,
Yeah.
you don't even know when you're crossing the state line, except the gas prices are a little different. That was
Mm,
my barometer.
mm.
And I grew up one county north of Columbus County in North Carolina, so, like, I know that area. Like, Myrtle Beach was where we went to the mall, we
Okay.
went to the big town. So, at any rate, what happened was Scott Spivey was, coming home. It was a Saturday in the fall, watching Clemson football at a place called, Boardwalk Billy's bar in North Myrtle Beach. He'd had some beers, he'd had a Fireball shot or 2 and, a cheeseburger, and got in the car after 5 hours and started driving home from North Myrtle Beach to Tabor City, which is about 25, 30 minutes. He lived in a trailer on his family's farm where in the area that his family had lived since the 1800s. Anyway, he starts driving home, and your folks in Horry County know this intersection very well, but the intersection of number 9 and Highway number 9 and 57 coming out of North Myrtle Beach is one of the busiest intersections in the state and the most crash prone in Horry County. I drove through it yesterday. I want to say it's 8 lanes going north and then bisected by another 6 lanes with multiple turning lanes and all sorts of ingress and egress for.
Oh, it's a cluster.
Oh, it's a mess,
An
and
absolute
gas
cluster.
stations and Tractor Supplies back there. It's a mess, and, I got turned around in there yesterday, I'm embarrassed to say. But, somewhere around there, Scott Spivey's driving a black Silverado north, and
Mm.
he encounters a guy named Weldon Boyd in a white, Dodge Ram TRX coming off of number 57. They get in a beef. We don't know what happened. It's not clear what happened. We don't have CC footage yet there. But around 540 or so, 538, 540, they encounter one another. And what Weldon Boyd says is that all of a sudden he's just coming out from buying fans at the Tractor Supply to take to his farm to put in the barn, and this guy's up beside him waving a pistol out the window next to his passenger side.
Spivey, allegedly.
Yeah, Scott Spivey is waving a gun out his window at his passenger, who's Bradley Williams, his best friend. So that's what we know. And then we have some limited security camera footage as they they have whatever initial beef. Scott's in front of Weldon at one point, but very quickly, Weldon's in front of Scott at one point, but Scott gets in front of him and really, to our knowledge, never gets back behind Weldon. And Scott brake checks Weldon. That's established. Multiple people saw that. He brake checks him, like, get off my bumper. And then he brake checks him again as they keep traveling north several miles. And they've been going several miles at a pretty high speed through the suburbs of North Horry County. And that second time he brake checks him, it sends Weldon Boyd into the median.
Oh.
And he's mad. And we find out later just how mad. So he starts following Scott for 9 miles.
And he's in a super powered
He's in a
truck, right? This
super
is one of
powered
these
truck.
Dodge.
It's a Dodge Ram TRX Hellcat. It was the most powerful truck you could buy as a consumer, a V8 engine. And you can hear that engine just purring as he hits the gas. They're going better than 80 miles an hour on the straightaways, 90 miles an hour at times.
Wow.
It's a truck so powerful. My understanding is they discontinued it because the emissions are
Wow.
out of regulation,
Oh.
which is kind of incredible in this country. But at any rate, he chases him for 9 miles, and there's a witness named Blaze Ward who sees Scott's truck to start with, and she starts following them. She's hauling ass too. She says it. She's following them. She calls 911, and she sounds terrified on her 911 call. There's a man out here. He's driving like crazy. I'm at the Little Caesars. I'm coming up in the food line. She's telling where she is and
He's
what
got
she
the
sees.
gun out of the window.
She says he's got a gun out of the window waving it. So she sounds terrified. There's another couple, Monica and Terry Wright, who live in Loris, and they're coming back from supper in their Suburban or their SUV. They see this beefing. They get stuck at a stoplight about 5 miles into the chase and don't see the whole thing, but they see some of it. And Monica, the wife, thinks she saw a gun. She did not see a gun, and the husband thinks maybe he did. He's not clear. So.
But there's pictures of the gun, right?
Well, that is as you get a little bit further up the road, keep driving. I drove this multiple times again yesterday. You keep driving and you're going pretty fast as you get once you get out of the stop and go traffic of North Myrtle Beach, you hit some straightaways. And they're hauling. And you can see there's a picture that Weldon Boyd's passenger took, Bradley Williams, out the driver's side door. Scott Spivey has the gun out the window. It's a 45. And he's got the gun out the window, his hands up. He's right-handed, but it's in his left hand
Saying
like this.
back off, basically.
Yes. What's interesting about that picture is if you look at it, Scott is in his lane. He's in the fast lane, the left lane. But Weldon Boyd, from the angle, has got to be in the turning lane, like straddling a lane to get that picture.
Oh, wow.
They went to some effort to get that picture. And the
Huh.
metadata data, you can also see how fast they
Hmm.
were going, which was fast. Anyway, you keep going. And then Scott Spivey turns on his road home, which is this country crossroads named Camp Swamp Road. It was one of those roads you just wouldn't. I mean, it was like in the Alec Murdaugh case when Alec said he got injured in a drive-by shooting. If you sit on that road where he was, Old Salkehatchie Road, where he was shot, I sat there for 30 minutes one day, no cars came by. This is a road you wouldn't turn on unless you were taking the shortcut to get to Tabor City.
This is about 2 miles south of the border.
It's 2 miles south, a little bit, right around 2 miles south of the North Carolina border. He turns on Camp Swamp Road. And that's when the fourth and fifth, there are 5 witnesses, 6 kind of, but 5 witnesses. And that's when witnesses 4 and 5 see some part of the shooting. They're the only ones that witness any part of the shooting. And that's Lindsay and Frank McMurrough. And they're coming down Camp Swamp the other way, headed towards number 9. And they were headed to the Avista Resort in North Myrtle Beach to meet some friends. They had just called their friends and said, we're 12 minutes away. Go ahead and order some drinks. We'll meet you at the bar by the pool. And so their mind's not in what, and Frank McMurrough, though, is a guy who grew up with guns. He knows from guns. And he sees a guy in a black truck jump out of this truck. Doors open. He's got his gun in his hand, and the slide is back. And Frank sees the gun as a person who grew up around guns, is trained on guns, says to his wife, "Gun, get down," and pushes her head in her lap. And he hits the gas to speed by whatever's happening. So he sees Scott get out of the truck with the gun and says, "Do not follow me anymore." And then
He heard him say that.
He heard him say that. He heard him say, "Do not follow me anymore." And he says, "The slide is back." He says that in every statement, all 4 statements he's given, meaning it was almost ready to fire, but the bullet wasn't in the chamber. And McMurrough says he keeps driving towards Weldon Boyd, and Weldon Boyd and Bradley Williams, and they had both said earlier in there, they were on the phone with 911. They had both said they were both armed. And he describes them having their guns up on the dash of that powerful truck, ready to go. And then all of a sudden he says, it looked like the driver of the white truck unloaded an entire magazine on Spivey. And when he looks, the only thing he sees of the shooting, he looks in his rearview mirror and he sees Spivey kind of twist like he's been hit. He describes it as like being hit with paintballs. Yeah. And then he beats feet around the corner to get away. So what we have is a shooting in broad daylight on a country road with 2 living witnesses, 1 dead witness, and 1 partial witness. Mm-hmm. And what happens is the police immediately say, "Oh, you were in fear for your life. Oh, gosh, yes, you were standing your ground. Standing your ground." What happened was the family of Scott Spivey, Scott doesn't have a criminal record. He was drinking that day for sure. We don't know what his blood alcohol level was because someone, and in the 330 pages of the police report, no one signs a document that says, "I agree that Scott Spivey's body should be towed in his truck." In 80-degree heat, his body was taped inside the truck and towed away minutes after all of the officers on the scene simultaneously turned their body cams off for 90 minutes. 90 minutes.
And there's evidence apparently that some of these responding officers were specifically dispatched because of relationships with Boyd.
What happened was that Horry County did a very, in my view, incomplete, uncurious, almost certainly corrupt investigation.
Mhm.
And 2 people have been forced out as a result, and 3 disciplined, and I expect more to
And there's
come.
an ongoing criminal investigation in the
3
department.
and 3 internal affairs officers down there investigating inside the police, multiple SLED agents investigating the corruption within the police department before they even take another look at the underlying homicide. But what happened was Jennifer Foley, who is Scott Spivey's sister, um, she feels strongly that her brother would not have acted that way. It's out of his character. There are 2 people on the scene, the body cams that we do have, that said, "Gosh, he was a nice kid. He went to church. Gosh, he coached baseball for little kids. This seems not like him," right?
Mm.
She felt from the beginning that th- no one was representing Scott, so she took it on herself and eventually filed a civil lawsuit. Um, after the months pass, and then they kick it up to the AG, and as Deputy AG Heather Weiss decides not to press charges. They file a lawsuit the next day. Her lawyer's Mark Tinsley.
Yeah,
Her
from the beach
mother-in-law.
case,
The
absolutely.
mother-in-law had been a Murdaugh super fan, one of these people that watched every day of the trial, watched all the documentaries, and remembered that Mark Tinsley, who's based in Allendale, had taken on the Mallory Beach case
Yeah.
and started the unraveling that led us to where we are. And she called him out of the blue from 200 plus miles away, and he called her back, and she described the case, and he's a hunter, and he said, chased him for 9.5 miles, turned in after him, and then shot him, and said, who's standing his ground in that? So he took the case. And what's unusual about that is that in South Carolina is one of 6 states that have these incredibly um, broad standard ground laws, the first generation of these self-defense laws that take away the duty to retreat anywhere that you have a right to be. So standard ground essentially means you can defend yourself in your home, right? The castle doctrine. Your home is your castle. You can defend yourself in your home. But Charlie Condon, as AG in the early 2000s, and then the legislature in 2006, ensconced that to mean you can stand your ground with no duty to retreat anywhere you have a right to be, primarily your vehicle,
Mhm.
side of the road. There was concern about carjackings at that time, and this was one of the ways you could be given permission
Which is
to.
not a bad thing. Let's
No,
go ahead and
no,
point
for
that out.
sure. And I think there are a lot
It's
of
a dangerous world, and
it's incredibly popular law here, and for many reasons. But that was the law that is applied. But what's different about South Carolina and these 6 other states that have these first generation iterations of these laws, um, you are also offered civil liability if you're found to be standing your ground, meaning I couldn't file a lawsuit for wrongful death if my loved one was
you're
killed.
immune. Yeah,
You're immune.
absolutely.
Separately from that, most of these shootings, many of them do take place in a vehicle. And in South Carolina, the tort law is such that if it's not the car maker, it's not the auto insurer's fault that you got shot in your car. So almost immediately they get dismissed from any lawsuit about that,
Mhm.
any shooting. So there's no insurance, there's no money.
Mhm.
And these are cases, wrongful death cases are the way that they are settled is with a financial, they call it blood money for a reason. What is your loss worth? And
Yeah.
there's no money in those cases. So very rarely, and no cases that I've found, significant ones in South Carolina, has someone tried to file a civil lawsuit, except for Jennifer Foley,
Mhm.
and with her lawyer Mark Tinsley, and then also Natasha Hanna, who's a lawyer in Myrtle Beach.
Well, it's a fact pattern that lends itself to. I mean, I certainly some folks have on Weldon Boyd's side of it have claimed it's a frivolous suit or whatever. But I mean, when I look at this
Oh,
thing with
Weldon
the
Boyd says they're trailer trash. They're after his money. That he, after all this is over, he wants to sue them for defamation. Yeah, he's been pretty explicit about it. But what happened was the Spivey family, and this is really interesting too, in Stand Your Ground, because Scott Spivey was killed by someone who claimed self-defense, Weldon Boyd had a right to be in his truck.
Mhm.
He had a right to be in his truck. Scott Spivey got out of his truck with a weapon. Doesn't matter if he fired it first. There's no evidence he did fire it first. But
Is there any evidence they knew each other before this road encounter?
there's no evidence they knew each other before this road encounter.
Has anyone suggested that they might have?
Many people have suggested that they might have. And the
Any
reason,
credibility?
and the first person who raised this issue, Weldon Boyd.
Hmm.
In his first interview that night down at the Horry County Police Station out in Conway, he says, you're going to hear it from me, so you may as well, you're going to hear it, so you may as well hear it from me. My ex-fiance is having sex with this guy named Benji Spivey, whose oddly last name, I'm told they drive the same kind of truck, a Shelby Silverado at that time. So he says, "You're going to
What?
hear it from me. My ex-fiance is dating this guy named Benji Spivey. I don't know Scott Spivey. I don't know if they're any relation, but I just wanted you to hear it because it'll probably come up." And in fact, it was already popping up in the Tabor Loris rumor mill is very active. They're all these, Herd and Loris Facebook
Right.
groups. But that's significant because Weldon Boyd was having a bad day that day. His ex-fiance, who was 7 months pregnant, um, he was fighting her for custody of their unborn son at that time. And he had served papers on her to return the 5-carat engagement ring and the $70,000 Forerunner, which she turned over that afternoon in a parking lot to some of his relatives. And we have the benefit now, for reasons I need to explain, of 1,000 text messages that he sent and received in the right around the time of the shooting. He's texting all afternoon. How could she show up with another guy? Who was in the truck when she dropped it off? How
Name's
could she
Spivey.
name? Well, it wasn't Spivey who was in the truck, but they didn't
Okay.
know that at the time. The ring is in the cup holder. What's that about? He was just he was hot. He was
Yeah.
texting even at 5:49 as he's pulling out of the Tractor Supply. So he goes to Tractor Supply right before he runs in Scott Spivey. At 5:25, he posts on Facebook Marketplace, must sell 5-carat engagement ring Forerunner within hours. 5:25. Pulls out at 5:49, he's sending a text to a friend. Could you believe she showed up like this? I can't believe what a expletive and all this stuff. And it's right at that time, 5:49, 5:50, that he encounters Scott Spivey. So no, we don't know of any pre-existing relationship, but Weldon himself surfaced the idea that he knew a Spivey and there was bad blood there. But what happened because Scott was not convicted, he wasn't a victim, right? He was the aggressor.
Mm-hmm.
The investigation found he was the aggressor. The family had no rights, no victims' rights.
Mm-hmm.
No access to the police file. They heard that 911 tape that we've all heard so many times now that Weldon Boyd called in. They heard it once in the entire first 10 months of the investigation when the police played them an edited version of it. And so the sister was having to file a demand for the autopsy of her own brother. It was an extraordinary circumstance. Once they filed the civil lawsuit, though, all that changed. And Weldon Boyd's lawyer filed a motion to compel the entire police file to be released. And what's nuts now to think about, Horry County said, "Are you sure you want all this stuff? There's some HIPAA stuff in here. Are you sure you want this?" They're like, "We demand it. Weldon Boyd wanted the entire police file. So Horry County turned it over in the fall of 2023. 70 gig of data, 32,000 files. Tinsley told me that when he first tried to open it, it looked like it had been organized by putting it into a blender. It was like, what is this stuff? And I've since gone through it. It's been weeks going through it. Well, it was so disorganized and hard to follow, and lawyers had multiple cases going on, and nothing was really going on with the civil suit, that months passed.
Mm-hmm.
And then finally, as you get into February of this year, they set a date for a deposition of Weldon Boyd and Bradley Williams. This is a key moment, a sworn deposition, the first and maybe only time that they will be giving sworn testimony about what happened. In advance of this hearing where a judge will decide once and for all if they're immune. And they're asking
Based on stand your ground.
based on stand your ground. So there's a civil immunity hearing coming up in March, this past March, that they were going to give this sworn deposition testimony to. And Jennifer knew it was coming up, and she was nervous. It's been 16 months since her brother died. There's no resolution. She's been yelling from the rafters. She can't get a phone call returned from the AG or SLED to save her life. And she asked her lawyers the week before, "Well, what's in the discovery?" "We can't figure it out. They're files we can't open." She's like, "Let me get it." So she drives herself to the law office, picks up a flash drive, mother of 2 toddlers, 2 and 4, takes it back home. And then the Saturday, it takes a day to download it all,
Mm.
a day. And since she doesn't like football, didn't care about football, so she decided she's going to spend Super Bowl Sunday going through all this stuff. She sends her husband and the kids to the mother-in-law's house. She literally sits at the kitchen table and starts opening file after file after file. And she's not sure what she's hearing. She's like, "What is this? There's random photos like ads for hamburgers, and then there's like calls that appear to be with Brandon Strickland, who she's acquainted with. She's like, who's this? She starts playing these incredible calls. There are 7 hours of secretly recorded phone calls that Weldon recorded himself on his own device, including 9 with the deputy chief. And the very first one, he calls from the scene. In some of those calls that Jennifer discovered, he says to his passenger seat, you can hear him right before he picks up, and he goes, "Don't worry. I got a judge. I got the number 2 man at the police department, and then the person that picks up is Brandon Strickland, then the deputy chief over investigations, and he's over internal affairs, the SWAT team. He's a very powerful man."
So from the scene of the
From the
shooting,
scene,
he's
yes, within minutes, he calls and says, first thing he calls his mama and says, "Come here, get here quick." And then I believe he calls his lawyer, but within minutes he calls the deputy chief and says, "Hey man, I need you to get out here. I'm at Camp Swamp Road." He says, "What happened?" He goes, "Well, I had to kill somebody." That's at 6:32 maybe. At 6:40, Strickland calls him back and says, "I was going to come out there. I thought better of it. I'm not going to come out there because we're very, very close friends, but I got the right ones coming. You're taken care of."
wow.
And she hears this the night before the sworn deposition, stays up all night, and at 6:57 in the morning starts texting Tinsley, "Listen to this, listen to this." And he has to drive from like Allendale up to Horry County, and he's listening to it and preparing his questions in the deposition so he can confront Weldon. And the reason that's important, and I'm sorry I'm just talking so much about this,
You
but I
love
find
this
it I
case.
find it
I love you.
extraordinary. I
Yeah.
find it extraordinary because what Weldon says in his own words is, you hear him tell his mother, um, his truck couldn't outrun my truck, and he was terrified, and he knew it. Scott knew he couldn't outrun me. He was terrified. Well, if you're terrified, if you're Scott Spivey, you're terrified to meet the elements of self-defense, you have to be in fear of your life.
Yeah. Here's the thing I got to ask you though, but and the one thing about this case that has never set
Yeah.
right with me is the pursuit. Because if I'm in that situation, or armed or not, call the police, pull over, let them handle the situation, give them the plate number, give them the make and model, tell them what you've seen. Don't continue to pursue the situation. But here's the thing though, I think, and I don't know why the AG declined to prosecute. I don't know what Heather Weiss's decision was based on, but the thing that has always struck me as difficult to get around is whatever precipitated it, whatever illegal chase took place, you still got a guy coming out of a car with a gun. And at that point, the guy in the truck can be the biggest asshole in the world. The guy with the gun can be the nicest guy in the world. The situations that led them there could be completely the fault of that person. But when the guy comes out with a gun,
No, and that is Heather Weiss's argument. And I have the recording of the meeting where she explains her reasoning. It is exactly that. And in her view, the only seconds that matter are on the side of the road. What precipitated it didn't matter. What matters is when Weldon Boyd and Bradley Williams stay in their truck where they have a right to be. Scott Spivey gets out of his truck with a gun. That is the minute, the seconds that matter. And and she also argues, and I think the law could support that, it doesn't matter who fired first. It just doesn't matter. Brandishing the weapon gives Weldon Boyd the right to defend himself.
how does the botched investigation play into it, though? Does it make it more difficult for the Spivey family to have some justice civilly? Is the botched
Oh,
investigation?
the one other thing I want to say about the law, to your initial question, the kind of layperson question, well, you chase him for 9 miles, okay, but then you turn in on Camp Swamp. And Weldon Boyd critically, in the eyes of Jennifer's legal team, critically gives 2 reasons he did that. The first reason that he gives on the scene to witnesses and law enforcement is, "I was hauling couches on a trailer. I turned in on Camp Swamp to check my load and make sure I hadn't lost anything." He says that a couple times.
Hmm.
He later says, "I turned him after him so I could keep following him." There's an inconsistency there. And there are witnesses who said that day in recorded interviews, "I just don't understand why I turned in after him."
Well, he relished it. And aren't there recordings
He
where
says, "I had an effing blast. I
oh,
had a good time. I'd do it again. He says to his best friend, Bradley Williams, "Let's go get teardrop tattoos."
oh boy.
So I think with, and it's still very much an open legal question whether Weldon Boyd was standing his ground. I think that it will be argued,
But
and
if that's resolved in favor of Weldon Boyd, all of these fact patterns leading up to it and in the aftermath, if that immunity is secured, it game over, right?
yes, but I did meet with a couple of Horry County legislators, and what is interesting about the Independent Republic of Horry, that is its own
Oh
place.
yeah.
You know, I was covered South
Sovereign
Carolina for a while.
nation.
It is its own place, and I cannot tell you what a big issue this is down there.
Yeah.
I met with two legislators at great length who have spearheaded this effort to get all the delegation except for one to sign a letter to Governor McMaster and say, please investigate this, appoint a special
Right.
prosecutor, something's wrong here. They met with Heather Weiss and with Alan Wilson and said, something is wrong here. Our people are demanding that you take a look at this. And one of them told me, he said, look, he'd been on the county, he'd been on the county council for 10 years and head of the public safety commission down there before he got elected to the legislature almost 10 years ago, or more than 10 years ago, Kevin Hardy. And he says, in all these years, he said, I went in to get a nail taken out of my wife's tire the other day so she could get to where she needed to be. I could not get in the door of the tire spot for people buttonholing me saying, what are you going to do about this? He said, in 20 years, I've never had an issue that my people care so much about. And both he and another local legislator say, if this is justified, then the law needs to be looked at.
Mhm.
Because in their view, as people who've studied it quite closely, it is one of them said it is murder. And if this is the law, that's not our intent. These are both gun owning guys, very friendly to the Second Amendment, but it's not our intent that you could chase somebody more than 9 miles and they couldn't outrun you, and you shoot 40 times through your windshield.
Well, this hearing is going to be huge. You mentioned Mark Tinsley, obviously an incredibly gifted attorney. There's also a big name representing Weldon Boyd now, Morgan Martin.
Brand new filing where Morgan Martin, a former legislator and just a lion of the bar down there, is coming in to represent one of the defendants.
Which changes the dynamics of the
Changes
case.
the dynamics, and it hasn't happened yet, but my understanding is it might prompt the judge to recuse himself because of relationship with Morgan Martin, and Morgan Martin is incredibly well regarded.
Mhm.
So the hearing was scheduled for June 9th to have this civil immunity hearing.
Mhm.
Was Weldon Boyd standing his ground? Was Bradley Williams standing his ground? It's supposed to be June 9th. The likelihood that that gets delayed is fairly high now.
Right. Well, it was your phone call to me was really the first download I had of this story, and I remember that first time you called me to talk about this case. I could hear the same kind of
You know me,
intensity and passion. I mean,
I'm
you
not a crusader. I mean, my most popular story about South Carolina had been I did a big story about the the Gaffney
the
peach oil, the
peachoid,
big
yeah.
peach. I did a front page story about beauty pageants in South Carolina. This Loris Bogoff. I mean, I, investigative reporting is something I admire. It's not how I've spent my entire career, but this one to me, um, just the idea. And the reason the Wall Street Journal cares, the reason I think that the Wall Street Journal cares is it's not just this case.
Mhm.
These stand your ground cases where essentially one witness is dead, one witness is alive. There's no video evidence of what happened.
Yeah.
They go away. I mean, there's several in this state. They're we're trying to get some federal data that helps establish, but my strong sense from the data, initial data, is there's hundreds a year like
Mhm.
this in the 28 states that have stand your ground laws.
Well, I don't know if you think it's heading in this direction, but it sounds to me like you might have another book on your hands here, Val.
You know, I think this story, I hope that your folks can look at the Wall Street Journal stories that ran. They're 2 parts, very long, but part of I'm proud of them because they
Yeah.
integrate the audio. I can tell you that Weldon Boyd said I had an effing blast. But if you play that audio and hear it yourself,
It's different. Yeah.
it hits different. And so throughout the piece, and it's meant for scrolling on your phone because so many of our readers come to us on
Yeah.
their phone. Yours do
Absolutely.
too. You can watch the videos yourself. You can
Mhm.
read the emails yourself. It's a case. We're trying to show you the case file as we now know it to be, as opposed to what we thought it was before
It
February.
looked pretty badass on desktop too, so
Oh,
don't
good.
sell yourself short. It
No,
was
no, no. No, I do think I think there's been there's our readers. It's one of the top 2 stories of the year for us so
it's
far,
big.
and
Yeah.
I've never had a story in 20 years at the Wall Street Journal. It'll be 20 years June 5th. Never had a story with this many emails. And the number one thing they're saying is, where's chapter 3?
Yeah.
What happens now? How
Yeah.
can it be the case that
Yeah.
nothing happens?
Yeah.
So I plan to keep covering it.
And so many of the same characters. You mentioned the Attorney General's office, Alan
Hmm.
Wilson's
Alan
office, the
Wilson,
office that prosecuted Alec Murdaugh. Here we are
SLED,
again,
Mark Keel,
state law enforcement division.
State Law Enforcement Division. And, y'all have done incredible work around Horry County Police and the Micah Miller case, the questions
Yeah.
in that case. I mean, we remember Brittany Drexel.
Mm.
There are a number of issues around, and from what the evidence shows me, there is a tendency in that department more so than others I've covered. I used to cover the cop beat a long time ago for 3 years. There's a tendency to circle the wagons around the
Yeah.
department. And I think even the Horry County Council has said, we don't know what's happening. We need an independent look at this. So
Well, police corruption, as you know, as you remember when you were a reporter here, a politics and governance reporter at the state newspaper for many years, you remember law enforcement corruption was epidemic here. And in fact, as we were coming on set to record this interview, this very day, a sheriff in the upstate of South Carolina resigned his office amid a federal investigation. So it happens all the time.
aren't there more than a dozen in the last, 10
That's
years? Even in the Murdaugh case, you remember that night when they come out to Moselle and the homicides happened on the Colleton County side of the line. The Colleton sheriff had been forced out of office and charged with corruption, or I can't remember what all,
yeah,
domestic
Andy
violence.
Strickland, all
Andy
sorts
Strickland had
of.
been charged with multiple crimes and forced out of office by Creighton Waters.
Hmm.
And so the temporary sheriff for a year had been Charles Gint, the
Hmm.
lieutenant of SLED, who filled in for a year. And then there was a new sheriff, Buddy Hill, that had just taken over. And he realized when he got out there, oh my gosh, this is Alec Murdaugh, and called SLED right away. Partly because the problems with conflicts in that department in the past. So it's so funny to remember. Y'all published, and I think a number of outlets did publish that initial 911 call from Alec Murdaugh that night. And I remember hearing it, and it was so hard to listen to. As a parent, as a person, you don't know what you're hearing. And his voice is high. He's hysterical. This is Alec Murdaugh, 41, 47. Please, my wife and child have been shot badly. Um, you didn't know what you didn't know. You didn't know it's a considerable debate. Is he a grieving father who was just distraught, or is he a person with a lot to hide? You didn't know,
Yeah.
but now it hits different, right?
Yeah.
And I feel this way about the Scott Spivey case.
Yeah.
It was open and shut very quickly based on the limited amount of information, including an edited 911 call that was out in the world. And now that we have the benefit, I remember it was like, here's what you think the reality is, and here's what was actually going on beneath the surface, and it's extraordinary.
Let's talk a little bit though about how these things are covered because you and I obviously go way back. Y-
25 years.
yeah. Well, I mean,
I saw a
half of
picture
my
out in the
life.
hallway of you in 2002, and I was like, you're flacking for Mark Sanford when the second Harry Potter movie came out. I
Isn't it
mean, that's a
crazy?
minute ago.
So wow. But it's you are arguably with the legacy media here in the state now, kind of with the national, you know, top of the line outlet. But I do want to give a little credit where credit's due. We talked a little bit about Mandy and her show and the podcast, but she is part of this kind of new order of things that are, for I think in a lot of senses a good influence on the process. It's an unconventional,
I think
uh,
absolutely.
yeah. And so you've got all, whether it's podcasts, whether it's these sort of independent content creators, all these different social platforms.
Mhm.
It's an entirely different game than it was when you started, certainly when we started. Uh, what do you think of the media landscape now when you look at covering a story like this and trying to get to truth, trying to do it the right way? Is it harder now? Is it more competitive now? I mean, what's your view
Well,
of
I
the
think it
landscape?
affects every aspect of American life, frankly. I mean, my kids get their news from TikTok. where all information is equal, and it's really hard to coach. Okay, well, let's talk through, especially with the threat from AI. So I think what this question is a really important one. Um, I actually think there are a lot, there are a lot of good things about this constant ability of average people to have a supercomputer in their hand at all times. And it's a megaphone, a microphone, a processing information, a camera. You got your
A
photo made. You
microscope.
got your photo made
Yeah.
at the coffee shop the other day
Yeah.
with the source. I mean, we have to be mindful of that. Alec Murdaugh said many times, I should have been born in Old Buster's day. I was born 40 years too late. Because in his grandfather's day, he was he was the center of the biggest bootlegging ring in the South, the subject of this massive federal trial, conspiracy trial, where 20 some defendants, many of whom got convicted, and old Buster, the master of the ring, walked because he could make a problem go away. There was no paper trail. There was no, there was no evidence. You remember when Peter Rudofsky said on the scene, the stand, he said, "You can lie, but your phone can't lie."
Mhm.
So I think the idea that we all have the ability to document in real time holds us accountable, and
Yeah.
holds other people accountable. So I think that is a guardrail. But I do think, the legacy media, which I think I'm proud to be a part of. This I was at the state newspaper, which at the time was the largest newspaper in the state. I think when I was in the newsroom, we had about 130 people in the newsroom.
It was massive.
It was massive.
That building is now
I
shuttered.
know. The building out on Shop Road by Williams Price. I
Yeah.
mean, it was, and now it's maybe a fifth of that.
Yeah.
It's a fraction, and that's replicated at every news outlet, legacy news outlet in the country, I believe. Except
And yet there's so much more content out there.
there's so much more content. There, instead of 2 news cycles a day, there's 6 or 8, and
Most of
also,
them driven by Nancy Mace.
and it's disintermediated, right? So Nancy Mace doesn't need the Wall Street Journal to communicate to people.
That's
We
true.
used to need, Hugh Leatherman, may rest in peace, used to need us to explain or to get his message out to his people. That's not the case anymore.
Put your South Carolina political hat on, because you were state house reporter for a long time.
4 years,
You
yeah.
followed these. There's a big governor's race coming up here in
Yeah.
South Carolina.
Yeah.
Obviously, Alan Wilson, guy we've been talking about, related to both of these big cases.
Yes.
He is one of the top contenders, one of the front runners. Some would arguably say he has the best shot to become the next
He's a
governor of South
very
Carolina.
formidable political talent from what I see.
Yeah. And then obviously Nancy Mace in the mix. She's made it clear that she's thinking about running. When you look at that dynamic, they're two
I think
very
she's made it clear on the daily.
right.
Yeah.
Yes, two very different styles. Which one of their styles do you think is better suited for this new world we're living in?
I, you know, I actually think it's kind of a fascinating test case of that question. Whether, President Trump, many people have emulated him or tried to, but he's proven himself repeatedly to be one of a kind.
Yes.
So whether that is the lasting order of political rhetoric and the way that you're a successful politician, I don't know. Um, Alan Wilson's a very cautious, thoughtful, plotting politician from what I view.
Mhm.
AG for what, 12 years, something like that? A long
Yeah, it
time.
was almost 16. It's his
16.
fourth
Wow.
term.
Wow.
Yeah.
So you don't have a long career in that office without being strategic and kind of careful. And then Nancy Mace has taken up the cause of the Scott Spivey case.
Mhm.
And I think she's also skilled at getting involved in, what we would think of as a big story of the day.
Yeah.
So I don't know.
Yeah.
It's hard to cover politics now.
It is. It's almost about, because we obviously do a lot of it on this show. And it's
Mhm.
funny to watch kind of our true crime audience interact with our political audience. It's kind of like, what are you doing here? What are you doing here? It's like it's two totally different. So we always try to okay, how do we?
But yeah, they
Yeah.
got to remember where you came from, though. But also just the idea, when I covered the House and the Senate, the House was, the numbers, it was not a supermajority. The House Democrats had some sway, and if a group of House Democrats banded together with a group of Republicans, they could stop whatever they wanted to. So David Wilkins, who was then the Speaker, was a master negotiator and coalition builder, and had to be. And across the hall, the Senate was 24-22 Democrats.
Yeah.
Isn't that extraordinary to
Yeah.
remember in the early 2000s that that was still the case?
Well, it's still 24, 22 Democrat. They just kind of
Eh,
shifted the labels around a little bit,
I said
Val.
to one of the guys I was talking to, I said, Kevin Hardy, I said, well, when I was in the House, when I covered the Senate, Luke Rankin was a Democrat. And he goes, well, he still is. I mean,
Let's say.
Luke is a Republican. He's been a Republican a long time, or he changed his party affiliation a long time ago. It was a different world, and I can just remember like squirming on the back wall when the Senate President Glenn McConnell would hold up your article in the front of the state newspaper and like highlighted it and just
Rip you up. Yeah.
rip you up. And this was, of course, about the Hunley submarine, the Confederate submarine.
It was back when Confederate flags were still in the chambers.
But I think I think it's inevitable that information. I mean, it cuts both ways. Information wants to be free. Information wants to get out to people. We see that in every iteration of digital advancements.
There's a hunger for it.
It's a hunger for it, and maybe it's not not always the best thing that they're gatekeepers who don't. In the same, I was critical of the Horry County Police Department for selectively putting things out there. I mean, let's air it all. And sometimes the legacy media either didn't have the bandwidth or the interest in covering every single thing that happened.
Well, in this new climate, what do you like about what you do? What do you not like about what you do? Because obviously we talked earlier about some of the personal sniping.
Well, I mean, I guess I would just say it goes with the territory. I mean, if you're going to be in the arena, you better be able to take some criticism, and we need to have tough skin. It
Mhm.
does. Not gonna say it doesn't hurt,
Yeah.
but we. It has been important for me to remember to hew the line that I've tried to hew.
Look down, not around.
Look down, not around.
Keep doing the thing.
doing. Look down, not around. That was advice that a colleague gave to me because the Murdaugh case in particular was so like sprawling, and there were so many things, bouncing balls you could cover. And my colleague, my friend Trent Mickle, said, "Look down, not around. Keep your head down. Focus on what it is that you need to be focused on."
Yeah.
And it helps to take social media off your phone. But no, I think, isn't it the case? I think the Journal did some reporting around this, that it's the visceral, personal social media posts that get the algorithms favor,
Yeah.
right? I mean, that's part of the reason why the discourse, Nancy Mace she says a lot of things that wouldn't have been said in a public forum maybe 10 years ago.
You can
Right?
say that again. Gosh, just this week. Seems like every week she's pushing envelopes a little bit further out there.
And but to your question, what I love about what I do, it beats working. I mean, I got to spend days traipsing around Horry County talking with people about a case that really matters to them, figuring out what the story is, finding things out, trying to put them in order and tell them to people. I mean,
Yeah.
wow, it's a privilege, and to get to be the person in the courtroom during. I mean, you felt it too.
Yeah.
You said to me at the end after the verdict was read that night, I was like, wow, what a story. And I said, well, there'll never be another one like it. And it was a privilege to witness that. It was difficult. It was serious. It was a matter of life and death. People died. People's lives, financial victims' lives were ruined. But it was a privilege to be observing and being the conduit for people's understanding it.
It's not over yet, as we mentioned. It's not over yet.
Not every year. And the paperback comes out June the 3rd.
Yeah. By the way, folks, if you haven't already, get on the list. The New York Times bestseller, Devil at His Elbow, Valerie Bauerlein. You've been incredibly generous with your time. I hope if we do this again, I hope you'll be a seatmate again, because it was always good. I would always kind of crib off your notes there from the trial.
Now that is BS.
But seriously, amazing work on this, and I can't wait to see what you report next on the Scott Spivey case. Thank you for kind of bringing us into that one, because your level of understanding of this story is just unbelievable.
Well, thank you for having me. South Carolina is my second home. I've had more bylines in South Carolina than I have North Carolina, where I've spent, where I grew up. And it's we've changed a lot in 25 years,
Yeah, it's been a minute.
but relationships are long, and that gets back to our earlier conversation about press corps. Relationships are long,
Yeah.
and and it's it's good when there's you can agree, disagree, shake hands, move on to the next thing, and you and I've done that a time or two over the years, haven't we?
We have to do. We won't tell some of the stories from. We were joking before about some of the stories from back when I was just getting into the political scene. I've grown up a little bit. I'm
You
at
were
least as mature as like my 11-year-old now, right?
Well,
So
no, you've
somewhere in
built
there.
something, and talking about the new media, credit where credit is due. You've built something that doesn't exist in most states. A person I admire in North Carolina, who's a very, very well regarded political consultant, called me and said, "Do you know Will?" And I was like, "Yeah." And he goes, "How did he do it? How do you
Yeah.
build something that is integral to how information gets spread in the state?" But yeah, mostly you need like Dylan, Andy,
That's what I was about to
Jen.
say. Is Dylan and Andy and Jen,
So
and I'm just
yeah,
kind of here along for the ride. But
yeah.
no, it's been incredible having you back in, Val. I hope you'll come back, particularly if this hearing, this stand your ground hearing, gets scheduled with the new judge. I know you're going to be doing a ton of reporting on it, but we'd love to have you back in when we start to see some motion in that case, maybe to help us make sense of which way it's going. If you'd be willing to do that.
Well, thank you for having me and for letting me talk about this case. I think one of the things about it that was challenging is it is 20 plus hours of video cameras, 7 hours of recorded phone calls, 1,000 texts, hundreds of pages of documents. It took weeks for me to wrap my head around this case. And I want people to understand that there's a lot that was underneath the surface that we still don't know. Even a few weeks ago, when the second officer was forced out for having written "Act Like a Victim" camera, which Beth Braden, who works for Luna Shark, to her credit, wow,
That's a great
that's a
get.
great get. My
Uh,
hat is off to her. So that led to the question, like, wow, "Act Like a Victim" camera. So it led to the discovery of seven more mislabeled. There had already been a mislabeled
mhm.
video, seven more mislabeled videos that document the turning off of video cameras.
Why can't people just do it right?
And then one was labeled robbery. Robbery. I mean, I think that's the part that is I want to give people the benefit of the doubt, but I feel like Horry County Police have taken a couple bites at the apple of partially getting the story out, but not fully. And I think it's time that we know everything that happened.
Yeah. Good, the bad, the ugly, no matter where it leads, right? You followed those stories wherever they go, Val. You've done an amazing job, not only in the Murdochs, but on this one. Can't wait to see where you take it.
Well, thank you. And thanks for having me back.
No, thanks again for coming in. A couple people watched this the last time we sat down,
A
so
few. A
we'll have to
few.
shoot for that.
I
Set a pretty
know.
high bar for us
It
here.
was no, it was
One of our highest traffic videos ever, I think.
oh, my next door neighbor came up to me and said, "Hey, I saw you on, Will's
Yeah.
show." And I was like, "Wow." But it's funny, when the book came out when I was here last August, it was right the I was here on a Friday, Saturday, and it came out that Tuesday. And I was so nervous. Like, what are people going to say? And it's been rewarding that not just like my parents like it or my sisters said it was good, but it was in Amazon's best book of last year. It was a
Yeah.
Goodreads nonfiction best book of last year, and so I feel um, proud to have gotten to do it and happy that people are reading it.
They're reading it, they're loving it, and I think they're going to be looking forward to what you've got to say when this next cycle starts. Because again,
From your lips to God's
the
ears, friend.
story's not going away. For
No, for
better or
sure.
worse, we're stuck with it again, and we may be sitting next to each other in another courthouse here in South Carolina in the not too distant future.
Maybe so. And I should say too, Dick Harpootlian's book, "Dig Me a Grave," about
Fantastic.
Pee Wee Gaskins. I had the privilege of reading an advance copy. It's a rollicking read.
It is dark.
It's dark,
It starts off just, gruesome.
grim,
Just,
but it was a grim case, and I
yeah.
think it kind of played out. What was he?
But you're
He
in.
was executed in 91, so it's a
Yeah.
little before a lot of people's memories. But it's a heck of a read.
Oh yeah. It's like yours. You're in. You're in. You can't put it down.
Yeah.
That's the mark of a good story. And you're a hell of a storyteller, Val.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
Hey, you're welcome to come tell stories on our anytime. Thank you.
Thank you.